I'm Joanna Hadley and I'm a fully qualified ballet teacher with the Imperial Society of Teachers of Dancing. In this video, we're going to talk all about ballet waist belts. Maybe you find that your waist belt falls down a lot when you're dancing. Maybe you find that it's too tight for you. Today, we're going to talk through the different options of how you can adjust your waist belt so that it fits you perfectly. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the Dancewear Central YouTube channel for helpful tips on everything dance, from improving technique to practical product advice and everything in between. Now, ballet waist belts come as one size, and we all know that people aren't one size fits all. So the adjustments that we can make, and this is what I'm going to show you in this video, is how to make your waist belt smaller if you find that it always falls down, and also how to make your waist belt bigger if you find that it's too tight when you're dancing. Just make sure that the dancer who you're adjusting this waist belt for is wearing their leotard. If you're wearing a jumper, a vest, anything, it won't give the same fit as if you're measuring this with a leotard on, because at the end of the day, that's when you're going to be wearing your waist belt. So first thing, go and pop your leotard on. We're first of all going to talk about how to make your waist belt smaller. Now, when we're dancing, what happens is we lift, we engage our core, and what happens then at that moment is that you think that your waist belt is fitting you perfectly, you lift, and the waist belt suddenly becomes too big for you. So we need to make the adjustment according to how the dancer is dancing. So that is a little bit tricky, especially if you're trying to fit this to a younger child, because as soon as you say, right, okay, let's try this waist belt on, let me measure your waist, they instantly lift up and really suck in and hold the breath. So the first thing we need to do is put the waist belt on, just wait a moment, and you'll just notice them relax. And at that moment, that is the point you want to take the measurement there. For this tutorial, you're going to need a waist belt, pencil, scissors, needle and thread. We're going to start off with the easiest option, and for this we're basically going to make a large tuck. We want to find the manufactured join and we want to bring it round to the front. We always make any adjustments using the manufactured join. And you can see here that this tuck is actually quite bulky, so I am going to give you an option for a much flatter version, but this is the easiest option. And what you're going to do now is grab a pencil, and we're just going to make a small mark which is going to show us exactly whereabouts the tuck is going to fold over to, ready for when we're sewing. So you can see here the pencil mark that we just made on that tuck, and we want to recreate the tuck that we just made. Now you want to be really precise about this, because this is exactly whereabouts the sewing is going to appear. You can see here that we have recreated that tuck that we just made on the dancer, and we're going to want to now sew all the way along all the sides of this belt, and we want to make sure that we are sewing through all the different levels of the elastic. So we now want to try and get a thread that is as close to the colour of the elastic waist belt as possible. You can see here I've gone for a slightly more purplish hue just so it shows up nice and clearly on the video, but you want your match to be as close as possible. Just checking that all the layers of elastic are nicely lined up, and now we're going to begin sewing. So with your needle and thread, we want to catch through each of the layers of elastic. This will make it a really nice strong hold. You can see you've taken a few stitches along here, and I'm going to continue sewing along this top edge. Turn and sew along the shorter side, turn it again and sew once again along a long side, and then turn it to sew along a shorter edge. If you're not too sure about these sewing techniques, keep watching the video as I'm going to cover them later on. Now I'm going to show you how to reduce the waist belt size But if you want a flatter seam, it's a little bit more intricate, this method, but it does get a really nice finish. So we're going to start off by cutting the elastic waist belt, and this would give us a really nice flat join, which you can see here. And also you've still got the full flexibility for making any adjustments that you need to do. Now you might find that you really have got a lot of excess material, in which case you can completely cut off the factory seam, and this will give you an even flatter look to your waist belt. Now you have two options for how to join together your waist belt. You can either leave it with a raw edge, or to give a really clean, polished look, you can tuck over one edge. If you've gone for the option of a raw edge, you're just going to get the dancer to try on the waist belt, and we're just going to put a little pencil mark. If you are going for the option where you're tucking over the edge, I suggest just putting a little pencil mark, then you know exactly how much you've tucked it over when it comes round to measuring it on the dancer in a moment. And we're now going to try it on the dancer, measuring the piece of elastic up to the little pencil mark on that tuck, and then measuring it around the dancer's waist. And we're going to put another pencil mark. We're going to find those pencil marks again that we've just made. There's the first one for the tuck. And I'm going to bring it over to the second pencil mark that we made. Now you'll see here that there is a little bit of excess material. Now that's absolutely fine if you want to leave that on. It will just mean you'll need to do a little bit more sewing. I'm actually going to cut some of that excess off. We're going to begin sewing all along this long edge here, and once again we're going to make sure that we are sewing through all the pieces of elastic. We're going to sew along the shorter edge now, and to do this we need to sew completely through the back piece. And then we're going to take a little bit of the fold at the front. And then we're going to sew back through to the back and repeat it all again. This makes sure that we have nice small stitches that don't show through. And we're on to sewing another long edge, and we do this exactly the same as we did the other. And now I think this is the trickiest part of adjusting a waist belt. The reason why it's tricky is because we don't want the thread showing through on the shiny outer of the waist belt. So what we need to do is when we're sewing, we need to be careful that we're only picking up just a few threads of the inside of the waist belt. And finally we finish off our sewing and cut away the excess thread. And now what you can see is our much smaller waist belt with a really strong join. Remember that the seam on a waist belt should always be worn in the middle at the back. And there we have our completed, smaller, perfectly fitting waist belt. Now we're going to talk about how to make your waist belt bigger, and for this you're going to need two waist belts. For this tutorial you're going to need two waist belts, a pencil, scissors, needle and thread. We're starting with the two waist belts. We want to find the manufactured seam because this is where we're going to make all the adjustments from. We're starting off by cutting the elastic waist belt. Now always make sure that you do this at the manufactured join. If you know that you're going to safely have enough material to fit around the waist, then you can cut off the manufactured join completely. And then we want to repeat exactly the same with the other piece of elastic. We're taking both pieces and we're going to create our first seam now. Now it doesn't matter too much with this first one about how much you cross over the two pieces of elastic. Obviously the more it's crossed over, then the more sewing you'll need to do. And also it's up to you whether you want to leave it as a raw edge or whether you want to fold over one edge to give a nice, neat, polished finish. And that's how I'm going to demonstrate it for the rest of this tutorial with that folded edge. And now we're up to sewing. This is the moment now where we need to measure the waist belt on the dancer. So you can adjust the waist belt wherever it needs to be, and you need to also make the decision if you want to sew this with a raw edge showing or if you're going to fold it over to give that lovely neat finish. The tricky thing now is just making sure when you are measuring that the seams are coming on the side of the dancer. Now we have our measurements. If you have any excess material, you can cut this away, but obviously just be careful because it's very easy to cut material away, but you can't stitch it back on again afterwards. So always cut excess material with caution. Now, because we're wanting the seam to come at the side, I actually have excess material on both sides of the elastic here. So you can see there, this piece is far too long, so I'm going to cut that piece away as well, because it only means that I have to do extra sewing. And you can see that's a much smaller and more manageable size for sewing. Exactly the same as we did with the other half, we're now going to start sewing along all edges of the seam. And here we have our two seams and our completed waist belt, which is a perfect fit for the dancer. And finally, just ask the dancer to dance around the room with the waist belt on. Ask them, is it comfy? Is it too tight? Can you see the waist belt falling down? All are really good indicators of whether you've adjusted the waist belt correctly. I hope you found this guide useful. Remember to like, share and subscribe to the Dancewear Central channel for lots more useful tips on everything dance.